Hello there, and many thanks for joining us on the program. I am Imonia Marere. As has become our tradition on this platform, we shall be digging deep into another contemporary issue in socio-political and economic development. Of course, the people's well-being remains the fulcrum, the center of our attention. With less than 12 months to the next general elections, Nigeria is yet again at political crossroads. Already, some ambitious politicians and their fronts have been crisscrossing the country in what they describe as consultations in their bid to occupy the highest office in the land. That's talking about the presidency. While some have openly thrown their hearts in the ring, others are still contemplating their moves, perhaps waiting for the right moment. But in all of this, the issue of what part of the country the next Nigerian chief executive should come from has and continues to dominate discourse, both within the parties and among Nigerians generally. Zoning or power rotation has gained so much traction that it is on the lip of almost every politician, both for and against. This political arrangement of convenience for power sharing among the political elite has always been problematic at the turn of every political circle, and of course depending on who is involved. Each of the 6 geopolitical zones of the country lays legitimate claim to the presidency, regardless of what capacity they will bring to the table. Time and again, we have seen a situation where touted messiahs have fumbled and fallen flat on their faces, muddied and bloodied, yet we tread the old beaten path again and again. Can it and will it bring us liberation? The functionality of the Nigerian political system, the political parties and their operators shall be the focus of our discussion on this edition of the program. Did we get it wrong from the beginning? If we did, can it still be remedied at this point in time? Our guest is none other than the founding National Secretary of the now defunct Alliance for Democracy, AD, one of the 3 major political parties that bettered Nigeria's Fourth Republic. A renowned academic, writer, and rights activist, Professor Udenta O. Udenta is director with the Center for Alternative Policy Perspectives and Strategy. He is also a fellow of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Professor Udenta O. Udenta was recently quoted as saying that any politician from certain parts of the country aspiring for the presidency in 2023 is a person without a conscience. What and who does Nigeria need in 2023? All of this we shall be diving into right after now. All right, thank you so much for staying with us. It is rare to find a Nigerian who is an academic, a writer, an activist, a rights activist for that matter, and a renowned researcher, and at the same time, a politician. But we have one with us right here in the studio today, former National Secretary, in fact, founding National Secretary of the now defunct Alliance for Democracy, Professor Udenta O. Udenta. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been quite a while.
Very long.
It's a pleasure.
And you went into what you called hibernation.
That was at the academic circuit. But I'm back from that hibernation.
Great. You didn't go on hibernation from politics?
Well, I've always been there, at the subterranean level, nudging things here and there.
Yeah.
But now this is open time, because this transition moment is very significant for the life of this country.
So when you say this is the open time, what exactly do you mean?
Because already in your intro, you talked about politicians crisscrossing across the country, consulting even when the intentions are fully in the public domain. You find the supporters, armies of supporters and support groups and civil society structures and platforms all over with their banners and their flags, waving them and asking them, nudging them to run. So, and we know that from the electoral calendar, you talked about the next election being slightly less than a year from now. If that happens, that means the next primary election for the presidency could be about the next 4 or 5 months. And thereafter, the electioneering campaign. So whoever is passionate about Nigeria, whoever is patriotic about this country, must be out there in the open, contributing to the discourse, to the conversations, shaping narratives in the public space. That's what I'm doing now.
All right, now let's take a step backward. In 1998, when you took the decision to be part of the birthing of the Fourth Republic and became the National Secretary, the General Secretary of the Action Alliance for Democracy, AD, I'm sure you and your colleagues at that time had a perception of what kind of politics you wanted to see.
Absolutely.
Now, 22 years down the line, what has changed? Do you think that the quality of politics and politicking that we have seen in the last 22 years has reflected your aspirations in 1990?
There is a noted, unmarked decay of thought and practice at the political domain. And factors contributory or responsible for this decadence of thought, weakening of the thinking faculty of Nigerians, understand our history and where we're headed, could take a long time to investigate. But I will implicate a few. One, people like us were not even fully prepared for the role we played. I started life as an academic. By 1995, I was a senior lecturer to be assessed as an associate professor in 1998. In 2000, I was ready to become a professor. That's 22 years ago, something I achieved only 3 years back. My career was disrupted. My livelihood was threatened. My life was actually under severe pressure. But we needed to rally the nation for the moment through that contributory role in shaping the transition from military despotism into civil, democratic craft. So one thing we had in mind was that we mixed opportunity when Abiola and Abacha died, when there was a vacuum in terms of the constitutional order, to insist that what the nation required then was not a regular pyrotechnics of transition, lift ban on politics, lift ban on politicians, have a timetable for election, but to have a negotiated settlements of the national question, which means the issue of restructuring, which is still raging today, ought to have been done then. Because Absalami Abubakar was a general, he was not elected by anybody. If you have forced him or pushed him, you could have done so. We didn't do so. We accepted the constitution the military gave us and say, that is something to begin with. The second plug was that elite had to negotiate power openly and subtly among the contending forces that make up a federated nation. Don't forget that negotiation of differences or negotiations of interests at the domain of differences is what makes life manageable. On the one hand, if had the military structure weakened by repeated coup d'etats, who wanted to preserve the institutional infrastructure even when they have left office. So they wanted somebody that reflected that image as the next president. He wanted the political class who felt that a towering figure like Elise Ikweme, who was a former vice president, leader of the G34, and one of the founders of PDP, was tailor-made for that job. And they wanted the overarching national consensus that the Southwest needed to be pacified because of the tragedy of Abiola's mandate. Those are the two things. The first one, as I talked about, what people like us went through, and secondly, what the nation expected for politicians and politics to be like. Going further down the line, because this is an issue I'm going to still revisit, how did it shape out that the military got its way? Put Obasanjo there in an electoral format when he defeated Falaye. How did it become that Ekweme, who led the charge for an inclusive democracy of the elite, lost out in Jos? How come that Ezefe, I'm sure you've interviewed him a lot of times, call him and interview him. He purchased a form of 1 million naira as Bola Ige did and as Falaye did. And when Bola Ige beat Bola Ige at the Rovan Hotel in Ibadan, which was the Southwest AD selection process, anybody who tells you it was an AD overall process is urban legend. The truth was, Ezefe and Falaye squared out in Abuja, and Ezefe could have beaten him. He had the numbers. He had the Southeast and the South and the bulk of the North. But we felt that we needed something to give, to negotiate something away from the Southeast in order to pacify our brothers and friends from the Southwest. The same thing with Obonion, who won the primary of APP as the party then was called at Kaduna. I was the secretary of the alliance of the two parties. I was secretary of the summit of the two parties. I know the story. He was not even looked at. He didn't even step down for anybody. We ignored him completely and fashioned the Falaye Shinkafi ticket, producing two proud Yoruba sons, two patriots, as candidates of three political parties that they were. So if I'm to extend the logic of my conversation now, it means that in 2023, nobody from the Southwest is qualified, morally qualified, to put his or her name in any of the ballots, whether the big parties or the small parties. That is what history dictates and compels. And I dare say too, on the evidence of our historical trajectory, our journey from 1960 to date, possibly nobody from the Northwest axis should put his name forward in this current context. These two zones constitute what you can call the zones of hegemony, hegemonic politics, from 1966 to the date. That is actually, for me, the final take on your question is, how come democracy was underwhelmed and inclusive governance with the so-called division of democracy not yielded to the people? Poverty is still raging in the land. Unemployment is harassing the youth. The youth bulge is real. Today we still have difficulties in supply chain of petroleum products. If our housing challenges and social infrastructure decadence or decay, this problem is that we did not even understand the basic foundations of this democratic journey. Clinton, the former American president, was here a long while ago, almost 20 years ago, said, this journey is back to pawn. It's a journey that is going to produce an incremental result, not maximalist result. The implication is that we have a Ferrari body, but a Volkswagen engine, and expect such a vehicle to win a Formula One race. The journey is a very tedious, incremental journey of the elite-driven democratic process. It's not a radical rupture in terms of revolutionary tendencies in Nigeria. So you take it slowly, and it's really taking it slowly. People did not expect the democracy to survive as others when they didn't survive. So the best hands were not even available at the onset of the journey. Today we know better. All hands therefore should be on deck to correct the grave lacunas of the past, the omissions of the past, in order to build a foundation today for inclusive development, inclusive growth, and inclusive participatory politics where everybody will feel a sense of belonging in Nigeria.
You have put so much on the table, Prof, but like you say, let's take them slowly and see how far it takes us. First, let's look at what you say was a missed opportunity at resolving the national question. Do you think that the slow nature of our democracy today, and indeed of our poverty and slow economic growth, has any relationship with the unresolved national question? If we had resolved the national question way back in 1998, before we went into liberal democracy in 1999, would we be in a different place?
Let me put it this way. Resolving the national question at the structural level is almost like a conversation about zoning and ability or capacity. Zoning, people believe, restricts the opportunity to get the best because you have just zoned to a specific environment where there may not be the best available. Restructuring is actually giving to the federating units what they expect to be their own fair share of participation in the nation-state building process. But at the same time, governance is important, whether you really restructure well or not. How about basic issues of governance? This constitution is not beloved by anybody, but it's not the worst constitution in the history of constitution making in the world. I've made very provocative statements in relation to this constitution and the US Constitution. This one is even a bit more democratic in the sense that even though it was a military-led constitution, it derived substantially from 1999 constitution, from 1995 Abuja's constitutional framework, even from 1989 Babangida framework in the so-called aborted Third Republic. So as bad as the constitution is, governors, senators, chairmen of local council could still have done better than most of them have done. You could still use disruptive and transgressive mechanisms of power and governance models to extend the frontiers and boundaries of this constitutional discourse. It can implement so many things that the Constitution may have been silent upon, not expressly stated or legislated upon. But at the same time, people expect that a new constitutional framework in which the country has been renegotiated or restructured to suit the purposes of a complex, diverse national groups may well deliver faster development, inclusive growth, and empowerment of different publics across so many identity lines, both class, both ethnic, both gender, and both generational. What we missed was that opportunity to say, as I said earlier, put our feet down and negotiate this outcome. And failing which, we have not even spent the past 10 years maximizing the benefits of a very flawed constitution. Because to now talk about restructuring in practical and not rhetorical terms becomes increasingly very, the dangers attached to it are very grave. You know why? Almost all the discourse about restructuring dwells at the domains of what to restructure, when to restructure, and why to restructure. There's always a sense of hesitation or silence when we talk about how to restructure. The strategies or the methodologies of restructuring, the processes. There are three. It is either you ask the existing governmental institution, which is democratic, to do what happened in Peru many years ago, which is something we'll not even say on air. Decapitate the democratic infrastructure, the democratic order, in order to open the space, as we had in 1998, for something better to come. Fujimoto did so. Nobody expects a sitting president or the concourse or the political elite to go through that route. Second is to overwhelm the system at the center here and said, we can push you away, create a vacuum, then do our sovereign national conference and bring a new constitution. They thought it's going to be a painful process of negotiations. I talked about negotiations at domains of difference. From the north, from the east, from the north, from the south, from the west, from the young, from the old, from women groups, from men groups, from everybody, from National Assembly, interfacing with authority, the political order, led by the president and the caucuses on the National Assembly to say, these are the viewpoints of the people. We know that the Constitution is difficult to amend or even topple. Go ahead and amend the Constitution to create the foundation for its toppling, which means to the National Assembly can't vote to amend the Constitution to permit its own dissolution. Once you dissolve the constitutional framework by those who created it and those who are servicing it, you create that space. That takes a lot of effort, requires a lot of intervention by democratic intercessors, civil society groups, and nationality structures and platforms. People are not going through that route. They just said restructure. How do you restructure?
That route will amount to political suicide for some people.
If you negotiate, remember I said negotiation of differences at the domain, negotiation of outcome at the domains of difference. What does that mean in practical terms? This is a homo-barbans post-structuralist construct about colonizer and the colonized. I did nothing between the colonizer and the colonized. The North and the South, structural demarcation from 1914 to date, something binds us, shared history, shared expectations of the future. That means you can't get 100% of the outcome in restructuring. 50% could be a starting point where you can now find conflict mediators and interlocutors coming together. What is the Southwest or Southeast or the Northeast or North coming to the table? Why don't we take away those areas that are so contentious we cannot ever agree upon? Let's begin to work incrementally with those areas that people can build consensus on. If you put that on the table, you can have a constitutional framework that is better than what you have today and build in a better, much more grandiose, maximalist future in time to come. That's the way I look at it. But politicians are always good at sound bites. The sound bite, for example, on zoning, if I'm going to go back to that route again, is the governors want to in the South. They want to zone the presidency from the North to the South, but they're very silent about where in the South it will go to. We are not silent in 1998-99. We are specific where it will go to in 1998-99. Even in the party meeting of AD at the Cultural Center, opposite UTC at Area 7, our leader and father from the East, Adamanko, came to speak about, with passion, about the sacrifices of the Southwest, about their dying at the barricades, up in exile, sacrificing everything, losing businesses. Therefore, Falaye must be the candidate. The Southeast group led by Bassey, they say, no, sir. It is going to be a fair contest in which at the end of the day, we'll resolve our differences to everybody's satisfaction. Again, resolution of differences. 7 hours later, Ezefe raised Falaye's hand. He sacrificed his own political ambition. Equipment sacrificed his. Obonon sacrificed his. Today, we are hearing from the Southwest, all the contenders, about the extremities of thought and practice. Do or die. I must have the presidency. Nobody's going to stop me. But people sacrifice their own presidential journey for today's own enjoyment of this contemporary generation. The same thing with restructuring. If you want to go and take it all yourself and in one fell swoop, without considering the sensitivities and sensibilities of others, their own sense of humanity and dignity as a people, this country will never make progress. We must accommodate the sentiments of the Southeast, South, South, Southwest, Northeast, North Central, Northwest in negotiating a new constitutional outcome. The nation is bound together by geography and demography. And within the demographics and the geographies of the nation state, an overarching territorial order, we can begin now to work out those areas people can come together, those areas that separate them. That is key.
In other words, you're saying that there are certain individuals and interests in the Nigeria of today who have lost their sense of history, who have lost a sense of where we are coming from and how we got here.
Oh, sure, there are people, because I remember that in 1962, the first signal for the decomposition of the structural and institutional foundations of the First Republic was Action Group crisis of 62, an internal dynamics within a party that was ideologically potent and philosophically clear. That led, of course, to the prison trial of Awolowo and the rest of them, and then the penetration of the so-called Southwest by the Northern forces in terms of politics of accommodation. Add that to the census of 63, and then the election of 66, 64, and then the wait here, the election of the Southwest in 65. The stage was set for the exhaustion of the historical possibilities of that First Republic. But it began with that Action Group crisis. Today we're seeing some signs of crisis in the APC, the ruling party, the party of the president and commander-in-chief of the Federal Republic, where the convention this Saturday may not likely hold all of the signals we see on the public display, and where you find dominant part players in that part of town in terms of party loyalty, talking about taking the presidency by all means and fighting dirty. The same way in Action Group in 66, people wanted to fight dirty. Some very influential politicians today want to fight dirty in the context of their own party nomination process, because you can't fight dirty when there's no general election moment available to us. You have to do that when you have the parties finishing the nomination processes. That is something they've not learned. The bitter tragedy of our history about to repeat itself. It is time the ruling party puts its house in order and the president steps forward to lead now. Not because anyone has interest in APC, but it's unstable APC as a party of the ruling, the ruling coalition portends grave danger for the survival of democracy and shows them the opportunity for a party like PDP ready now to rescue Nigeria in order to do the job he set out to do at the end of his last convention. That is very key. And that is why we talk about this zoning mess. If you want to zone to the south, like the southern governors will proclaim, you must zone to the southeast. It must be region specific as it was in 1999. And evidence available to us, not to me, not to you, Imoni, to everybody in the country, was that in 1999 to 2007, General Obasanjo was our president from the southwest. 2015, possibly to 2023, Oshibanjo is our vice president from the same zone. That is an 16-year presidential journey at the level of the presidency and the vice presidency. From where you now decide, in a very strategic manner, the founding of the democratic process, the nurturing and its consolidation in terms of security, defense, apparatus, what happens there, who gets what there. If you do not now zone to the southeast and pronounce it by the parties, it therefore means you are doing politics of deflation and concealment to deceive the people. That is where, for example, my own Balam, Mohammed comes in as a rearguard battle. A rearguard is to fight, use practice to overcome contradictions. China did it in 1978 under Deng Xiaoping. The Mao period was that of doctrinal communism, in which he didn't want to overcome contradictions. He wanted to slaughter contradictions out of the way. For me, I have to overcome contradiction, the perfidy of the elite, the sham of certain zoning that will not pronounce the southeast as the zone of attraction for that zoning. We mean that at the end of the day, the people of the South will be deceived. And it's too late for a rearguard battle. I start my own rearguard battle now. If the parties, PDP and APC, zone to the southeast, official pronouncement, the question of whether I'm supporting Bala Mohammed becomes mute. He too will understand that this president has been zoned officially by his own party to the southeast. If he fails to make that pronouncement, he may be perfecting and consolidating hegemony of the southwest and maybe hegemony of the northwest. And why I'm from the south, and can speak passionately about the South. I leave it to the northern, not from the northeast and the north central, to see whether they will, even in this turn, expect a south-northern hegemony to continue from Ahmadu Bello. Don't forget that in the First Republic, Tafa Bella was a prime minister, but he was a deputy to Ahmadu Bello. He took instructions from him. It was a parliamentary system of government, not a presidential system. The party leader dictates the tempo, the direction of policy. From there to Shagari, from there to Yar'Adua, from there to Buhari. If those in the northeast and the north central expect that outcome in 2023, so where be it, let them litigate their own crisis of geography and demography. Me from the south, no proud Igbo son from the southeast, we cast a lot, his or political lot, or her lot, with the southwest. By doing so, consolidating on southwest political hegemony in this current dispensation.
It's as well that you have tried to explain what I consider to be the contradictions between your advocacy for an Igbo president and then your support for Bala Mohammed, who's from the northeast. But be that
we come to that later.
Yes, we'll come back to that later. Well, you see, there are 18 registered political parties in Nigeria as of today. Supposing, I mean hypothetically, the APC and the PDP do not zone the presidency to the southeast as you expect them to do, there are 16 other political parties. And there are indications that there might be an emergence of a third force somewhere along the line before the elections. If the third force or any of the other 16 political parties decides to field a southeasterner, a candidate of Igbo descent, as president for 2023, what then happens?
Imoni, you and I have been conversing for almost 25 years, not from Abuja, from Alabama, if you remember. I used to speak in less practical and precise terms. But as you get older, you learn that rhetorics of confusion and language that is colorful and beautiful may conceal the truth. So these days I try to speak very plainly. We've heard about the mythical third force every election cycle. Disaffected members of the PDP and APC and so on, trying to create a third revolutionary moment that is going to dilute the potency of these two hegemonic power blocks. It has never worked, and it will not work this time around. It's too late to work. The structure of our democracy and party institutional control is so dominated by the established political order that when you have the 36 governors, you can reasonably predict the outcome of the next presidential election from either of the two parties. Adding the other forces, overarching forces like the former presidents, the former military leaders, and so, who are attached to these two parties. So if you have the South is being denied opportunity in these two parties, and they pick up a third miserable force that want to satisfy emotion and symbolism to have had somebody run. They have run in the past. Ikembe Mekojibo ran in the past. I think Chekwas Okuru too was the leader of Abuja too, ran in the past. And maybe one others ran in the past. Jim Wood at the time ran in the past, UNPP. He didn't lead them anywhere, and it will not lead anybody anywhere. The way the nation is structured, almost as if we're trying to redemocratize the Babangida own institutional hand-down, paternalistic method of a little to the left, a little to the right. Because 1989, he constructed this paradigm of two-party structure. It has happened from 2013 with the birth of APC. If you have one candidate from the southwest, maybe the APC, and PDP is hesitant to zone to the southeast, and we remain in this country called Nigeria because there's no other place to escape to, I expect that person to be from the north. If at all, my people don't get it. I'm saying they should get it. That is why my rearguard battle is very important now. Because I know the perfidy of the political class, they're shenanigans. When they speak in bland, amorphous, indeterminate terms about zoning to the south, they are very silent on where you should go to the south. We are not silent in the past. Let me keep on repeating this. We are very clear and precise. We sacrificed a lot. Even when AD lost the election and Obasanjo formulated his own weak paradigmatic structure for the government of national unity, the three people selected were from the southwest. Our leader, Abraham Adesanya's daughter, Dugbe, my good friend, Uncle Bolage himself, and then S.K. Babalola, who contested with Nia Adebayo for the primary election in Ekiti State. The South did not ask anybody from the southeast, give us one name to add to this mix. They took all, but we didn't depart the party. We remained loyal members of the party, diligent. So we expect today that the labors of the Southwest in APC and PDP should consummate with the doctrine of restrained power among the elite, restraining the rapacity, the greed, the avarice of the political class. That is one way to zone it to the Southeast. If that occurs, even Bala Mohammed will know that his candidacy is mute. That if that fails to occur, and I don't trust politicians to do it, you must walk ahead of them and produce a rearguard moment. So when they flank you from the front, because of their own rapacity and dominance, you use a rearguard battle to wait for them. That is actually the strategy.
All
Practice overcoming contradictions. That's what it is in philosophy.
Okay, we take a short break. When we return, we will be exploring more issues in this discourse on Nigerian politics and politicking. Stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us. People, politics, and power. My guest is Professor Udenta O. Udenta, founding General Secretary of the now defunct Alliance for Democracy, AD. He's an academic, a writer, a rights advocate, and, of course, a politician. That's how he describes himself these days.
I don't know the level of politics I play. I'm always an incidental politician.
All right.
I don't really stay too long in it.
So let's return to the anecdote of the Ferrari body and the Volkswagen engine that you talked about earlier on. In relation to the Nigerian Constitution and its operators.
Okay. Now, there is something in social thought or political thought. I will try to break it down a little bit. Let's say we're talking about norms, those practices, principles, cultural values that people take as regular, as generic, something that everybody knows and feels. Respect your father, respect your mother, respect the seniors and elders. You know, women sometimes should be subjected to men, and then the Constitution is respected. Say, you know, sing your national pledge, and so on and so forth, and the national anthem. These are normative things. But norms are essentially concealed ideologies. That's why a scholar called Louis Arthurs had talked about ideology and ideological state apparatuses. Check the issue it mentioned, monetization of politics. Why wouldn't my people, the Southeast, take from one of the small parties? The dominance of the other parties will stifle that possibility. But they tell you on paper, every party is equal and everybody is equal. That's the norm. But ideological foundation is that they are not equal. Take the law. They say it's blind. A guy who steals a goat somewhere in massacre gets convicted within a week and jailed for 20 years. 95% of those in awaiting trial facilities are people who have nobody to speak for them. But the law is blind. But it takes a governor 12 years to be tried, and most of the time not convicted. That means the law is fully cited. It's ideological apparatus used. So liberal democratic norms are trumped by practice. A liberal practice, suppression of human rights, denial of space for the media, including your own media here, has some running battle with the authorities of the day. These are all efforts to frustrate the full glowing of democracy. See, liberalism and authoritarianism are part of the things that dwindle the effectuation of democratic practice and inclusive governance. Another one will have to be issue with perpetually talking about corruption. Corruption is something which is very important because it leads to decay of governance and statecraft. But much more impactful than corruption, you talk about mediocratization of governance. Why do we produce cycles of personnel who have been underperformed and underwhelmed? These problems are not essentially structurally alone and constitutionally alone. Human capacity is important. That is why you find that at the margins of the society, the nation bristles with a lot of capacity and intellect. Move abroad, Nigerians are delivering in every field. What Achebe and Shoyinka did in the 50s and 60s, the Chimamandas and Helong Abelas and Chris are doing it in the 21st century. That means there is no weakening of the mental state of the Nigerian people as individuals. But when you aggregate us as a team, and they find mediocratization of governance and statecraft, you find the worship of indolence and incompetence. You find people who see government resources as their own, which means can't separate the personal resources available to you and the state resources which you're supposed to watch and husband. No society can make progress. That is where you find decaying infrastructure, budging youth unemployment, poverty, capital of the world, all manners. Look at the weakening of the Nigerian currency and so on and so forth, and even delivery of basic services, including power supply and fuel in distribution. All these are all crises of governance and crises of underdevelopment. How do we get it right? Get the politics right first. And 2023 may well be a reset time for the nation. A lot of things got complicated under the watch of the current government. The whole fanciful effort to rhetoricize governance at the level of bombastic, expressions of thought, propaganda-driven, agenda, as against settling down and looking at basic minimal situations the government can intervene in and work on. Not that the government itself underwhelmed in every single particular. No government can, you say, fade in every single particular. But overwhelmingly, this government was distracted by itself. We expect that the next government in 2023 will not be distracted by its own self-imposed contradictions. And if that happens, we could say that 20-something years will be enough for the people of this country to begin to witness the flowering of democratic practices and the burgeoning of democratic effects in terms of dividends of democracy. But if we reset it correctly in 2023, and if we find opportunity, as I say, the third option, the third way to restructuring, all hands being on deck to negotiate these differences at that domain where everybody intercede, it is important that this country can jumpstart its development and move on.
Talking about jumpstarting or leapfrogging our development, one would have thought that given the number of years of self-rule, 62 years of independence, at this time we should as a people not be talking about zoning, power sharing, and all of that stuff, that we should be talking about merit and not.
Anybody in money who tells you otherwise is either being clever by half or being naive or plain ridiculous. You're an Igbo person, you're a Yoruba, Hausa, Fulani, and Gas before you're a Nigerian. You cannot decenter and specialize your identity construct because you have a capacity as a Nigerian. Some candidates saying we're going to run as Nigerians, but you have what is called lineage of power and authority. Some resign from offices to contest election at the local level, and the people send them forth to represent them at the center. Then when you occupy dominant positions at the center, you now delink from your zone or section or region to say, it doesn't matter to me, it's only my capacity that speaks for me. No. US is the fulcrum of the so-called liberal democratic order today, and identity politics or culture wars. That is what resonates there powerfully. That's what Trump came to expose, his bare limits and his strictures and guardrails that really put together this so-called culture war. Take, for example, the current battle in the US over CRT, critical race theory. Critical race theory is a refunctioning of the old critical theory of the Frankfurt School from the early part of the last century. Today, to the construct on intersectionality, that means gender oppression, racial oppression, class oppression, merging together to produce a moment for dominated groups to challenge the dominators through counter-hegemonic practices and methods. So CRT is a method in which you have to reinvestigate American history and know whether racism is just an ephemeral occurrence or structural occurrence within the system. So when you talk about gay rights and gay, so on, when you talk about abortion rights, these are all identity issues. Black and mainstreaming the black into the American political and economic mainstream, the Latino groups, the men group. So identity politics is there, and it can work side by side with politics of merit and capacity. If you zone the president to the southeast, even to my village will produce a president, a vice president, and professors in every ministry. That means my village alone has enough to govern Nigeria at the cabinet level, not to talk of the southeast or the south-south or the northeast or the northwest. So when people want to try to exclude or politics of exclusion, there's a mutual exclusion between zoning and capacity. That is not true. But zoning is a means, a paradigm of restrained power and appetite for that power among the elite. It may not even be legislated upon or constitutionalized. It may well be gentleman's understanding that it is the turn of this specific unit to secure this outcome. If you don't give it to them, you're not including them in the national conversation. And they have a right to use a rearguard method in order to say, I can mainstream myself like the Southwest did in 2015 when Osibanjo became the vice president, and he's actually putting himself somehow, I don't know, for the big job. Like in 2007, when Jonathan, our former president, became the vice president, and the presidential moment came and he became president. And beyond even the issue of the presidency or the vice presidency, when you talk about merit and capacity, the key thing in the South is actually inclusion. You have a defense and security apparatus of the state or council where there's no single Igbo voice, Southeastern voice. Nobody there to decide on impactful decision-making processes and situations affecting their own destiny as members of this group, of this nation. We find in certain commands of the system, both the apparatus of economic governance, both in terms of immigration, both in terms of areas that concern the entrepreneurial ability, like the MPA, NIMAS, and so on, their voice is muted. These are part of that inclusive politics you're talking about. It's not even the presidency as a single subject. So it is actually the presidency and all the effects that come with it. So when you find zoning that is ridiculous, that is blunt, that is viciously, full of perfidy, and that is actually conceals and deflects from the truth of the matter, the Southeast will have no choice in order to remain integral players within this system to do the rearguard battle as Udenta is currently doing. But if the political parties, not nationality groups, not civil society, who are already doing it as patriots, passionate patriots who are saying, Ohanese will say, you must go to the Southeast. Pandef, Afenifere, Middle Belt Forum. But they are not people who decide destinies of political parties. They are not determinants of outcomes within the political establishment or established political order. The party leaders, the governors, the senators, and the BOT members and the caucuses do so. And they are being very elliptical, very opaque, deliberately deflective in their nuancing of zoning. When you nuance zoning to become amorphous and indeterminate, you are concealing something, the loss of humanity of the Southeast. You are deflecting something, the need for historical restitution. And because I am aware that this class of politicians are not ideological class, they are not devotionary class, they will not listen to moral imperative or ethical authority to say, let's do the needful as Udenta them did in 1998-99. We prepare for the time when the betrayal will occur. I will not be caught snapping when that occurs.
Which of course takes me, you just hit the nail on the head there about the nexus between the lack of an ideological foundation in most of these political parties and what obtains today in the structural defects that seem to be very obvious in the political parties.
Very important. Let me speak about the PDP, because AD didn't last that too long as a robust platform for us to interrogate this particular subject. PDP came with a set of mindset. It came with a vision for what Nigerian democracy will be down the line. Obasanjo must have helped to infuse that logic of a party in a hurry, to not only to rebuild the infrastructure of democratic governance in Nigeria, but extend the frontiers to the rest of African countries. That's why they established the PDI. People Democratic Institute was just a response to the avalanche of what they can call benignly invading Western structures and superstructures, democratic building, in purposes. The NDI, the National Democratic Institute, the NIRI, National International Republican Institute, IFES, Commonwealth centers, and so on and so forth. You have so many of these institutions coming to help us shepherd our democracy, to help straighten institutional foundation of the democracy, to help look at autonomy of political parties and the internal democratic practices, to look at even managing finances, local mobilization, voter, access to voters, and so on. PDI therefore set to do that, to infuse PDP with an ideological clarity, with a philosophical purpose that in 20-something years could have displaced this avalanche of Western institutions and then led the PDI into a trajectory across the whole of Africa. That did not work out. But I suspect that under Dr. Yochi, the current national chairman of PDP, a seasoned scholar, a sociologist of intellectual reckoning, who understands this. I'm sure he's rebuilding the PDI if the conversations one is picking up here and there is anything to go by. Once the PDI is rebuilt, once you find the strategic capacity infused into it and secure scholars and researchers and practitioners in civil society who could help drive that, maybe in the next 10, 20 years, this kind of question will have a better outcome in terms of response. Let us see how it goes. And true for APC too, in spite of the fact that I'm affiliated now with the PDP and with the Bala campaign, the Mohammed campaign, it is important that APC too should think in terms of building the groundwork for another radical or revolutionary, ideologically solid and sound platform that could extend its own idea of nation state and national governance.
The APC, for instance, is a coalition of so many forces that you were part of at the beginning that eventually transited to, and one expected that the ideological underpinnings of the AD, the APP, and all of that eventually emerged as the APC would be stronger than what it is.
What you have there is a party as a general purpose vehicle, GPP. GPV vehicle. I don't want to dray down into the contradictory permutation that led to the emergence of the party. But I can tell you it was a construct of a Baconian friendship type. Baconian friendship is when people squabble. But when they have a bigger threat, they come together, reduce their own squabble to fight a bitter existential crisis. The chap that put together APC had a bigger problem. The Jonathan presidency had to decapitate and topple it. The moment they succeeded in doing that, they simply could not come together as a coherent and cohesive force. Maybe this election and this crisis they're going through, convention not to be or to be and so on, will be a moment for them to either go back to their founding of the legacy parties and other structures and parastructures that came together to build their party. If they do so, the party could become a sensible party, even if it loses the next election. For PDP, as I said, the recovery process has begun to rescue Nigeria under the watchful eyes of Iyochi Ayu, who is a seasoned, not only operative at the political level and bureaucratic level, but equally seasoned scholar and intellectual. That is the only way one can talk about. And again, the third force you're talking about should take time to build itself. A third revolutionary force, like even a party of the masses, a socialist-oriented party, is long due in coming. Those of us with a background in Marxism and Marxist scholarship and Marxist revolutionary thought have somehow put, to task. Why are we playing bourgeois, liberal politics when our foundation is Marxist politics? Yes, as I said in the past, I could rhetoricize this conversation to no end. But I mean, it's important for me to know that practice overcomes contradiction. I will not put my head in the cloud as an ideological man, resurgimenting ideological moments, while at the center of the country is slipping into disorder and waste.
Let's use the remaining few minutes that we have to take a look at the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. It's been so controversial for a while now.
It shouldn't be.
The expectation is that Mr. President will sign that bill into law anytime from now. Otherwise, the civil society
should sign it into law.
Already mobilizing.
I said it should sign into law, but one thing that is sickening to me is when you make a law that seems to be a law that you make for the moment. No matter how powerful a law you want to enact, a legislation, self-interest should not be in it. Even when you put there, goes against your own interest for the moment. Historically, in future, it may well impact in a salutary manner to the fate and destiny of our democratic enterprise. When they had the first insertion about direct primaries alone, that was insufferably naive and stupid. You leave the parties options in what they want to do. When they now say ministers and others have to resign before, it's even unnecessary. The key thing that electoral act, the transmission of results via electronic means. Somewhere down the line, 2-3 years, you can begin to bring in other not strategic, not fundamental, purposes of that law. The key thing is electoral. So keep your eyes on the board. Smuggling in a few other things there leaves opening to other people who may not like it, not to persuade the president not to sign. I do hope he signs that electoral act into law quickly. The PDP governors have evoked that sentiment to say, sign this into law. Whatever is there, correct it down the line. So if that happens, I think the electoral act coming into effect will produce maybe a better electoral outcome in 2023.
And then finally, we seem to be agreed on the fact that the Nigerian political system is not a perfect one.
Sure.
It's one that needs to be reformed one way or the other.
It has to be.
How do we go about this? Is it through the process of lawmaking or indeed of helping to rebuild the entire political process?
The first is to rebuild infrastructure. Democracy is planked by 3 variables: instruments, institutions, and processes. If you get the instrument right, which is the constitution, and as I said, it takes time to get that constitution right, then the institution is produced by instruments, not just the tiers of government, but political parties too. Get the political parties right, internal democracy, ideological clarity, functioning of a political domain in a way and manner that it helps to build inclusive participatory democracy. Civil society allowed to its responsibilities and not just chewing on everything. Achebe, in Hour of God, we talked about what I call escalation of the ritual moment. Why do you take on something which is not even your own problem? Civil society should know those things that is their own problem and leave those things for the intercessors, those who are elected to solve the problem. Put pressure on them. One will not believe in division of labor between the media, civil society, and the political class and corporate players. When we now strengthen democratic governance in the political parties, when we redo the constitutional foundation of the state, and then bring in people who are capable, and then reduce mediocratization of statecraft, this country democracy will see a better time.
Professor Udenta Udenta, it's been a stimulating session with you. I look forward to more of this in the days ahead. Thank you so much for your time. Professor Udenta Udenta, renowned scholar, rights activist, fellow of the Abuja School of Social and Political Thought. Joining us here on People, Politics and Power to take a holistic look at the Nigerian politics, the Nigerian politician, and the entire gamut of the political processes. Thank you for investing your time with us. Join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of the program. Bye for now.